battlefield of silence. The twin suns hung low over the alien world, painting the sky with a blood-red glow. Ash drifted like snow, falling softly over the broken plains. Ruins of war machines lay scattered, their black metal twisted and burning. And in the middle of it all stood a lone human soldier, silent and still. Captain Marcus Hale breathed through his cracked visor. The air thick with dust and smoke around him. Thousands of alien warriors stood in formation, their armor gleaming with cold precision. Their blades shimmered in the dying light, curved like the claws of predators ready to strike. But Marcus did not flinch. He gripped his weapon tighter. The edges burned from overuse, his heart beat slow. Steady, waiting. High above, a floating throne drifted forward. Surrounded by banners of gold and violet, upon it sat the Alien Empress, her eyes glowing faintly like blue fire. She looked down at the lone human, her expression unreadable. She had seen many warriors die, many worlds burn, but never had she seen this, a man refusing to kneel. Her generals whispered, "He's lost, my Empress." One soldier cannot stand against an army. But she raised a hand for silence, her gaze fixed, curious. Who was this human who dared defy her entire empire? The wind howled across the battlefield. Carrying the scent of metal and death, Marcus stared up at the throne, his voice breaking the silence for the first time. "Then come and see," he said softly, his tone calm, steady, deadly. A ripple passed through the alien ranks, confusion mixing with anger. The Empress leaned forward on her throne, her lips curling slightly. "Begin," she commanded, and the drums of war thundered through the valley. They came at him like a storm, a sea of armor and teeth. Marcus moved like a ghost through the chaos, his plasma blade flaring to life. Every strike was precise, every motion born of desperation and training. He had fought in colonies that no longer existed, defended cities that the galaxy had already forgotten. Each enemy that fell was a memory, a promise kept, a name whispered in his mind. He bled, but he did not stop. He was only one man. Yet he moved as if he carried the strength of thousands. The alien soldiers slowed, their movements faltering as disbelief spread among them. The Empress rose from her throne, eyes wide for the first time in centuries. She had seen countless battles, but none where fear ran through her own troops. Marcus stumbled, blood dripping down his armor. But his voice came again. "For Earth," he whispered. "For those who believed we were gone." His words echoed across the field like thunder, and for the first time the Empress felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting the wreckage of the battlefield. He fought beneath that light, every movement painting a story of defiance. The alien war drums began to fade, one by one, as the warriors realized the impossible. This human wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting so the galaxy would remember. His defiance became legend in real time, each swing of his blade a message. The Empress felt her heart tighten as she watched. Was this strength or was it madness? Whatever it was, she could not look away as the last wave charged. Marcus dropped to one knee, exhaustion consuming him. He lifted his weapon once more, his arm trembling, but his eyes clear. The aliens paused, sensing something beyond courage, something unbreakable, and then silence. The battlefield stilled, the dust settled. The Empress herself stood, her army frozen, her mind racing. She had commanded thousands of conquests, crushed entire species without a thought. But this human, standing broken and bleeding before her, had done what no army could. He made her feel doubt. She descended slowly, her throne lowering toward the ground. Her gaze locked with his. "You fight alone," she said quietly, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Marcus smiled weakly, the light of the setting sun reflecting off his cracked visor. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I fight for everyone who can't." The Empress said nothing. Her warriors waited for her order, but she gave none. The wind howled again, carrying the smell of smoke and metal through the endless silence. The alien world, once loud with war, now held its breath, and above it all, the Empress watched the lone human, realizing, perhaps for the first time in her reign, that some battles are not won with armies. But with spirit, the silence grew heavier, and the suns dipped below the horizon. In that crimson twilight, the Empress whispered to herself, "The galaxy will remember this," and so it did. For the war that began with one man standing alone would shake the stars for centuries to come. The echo of humanity. The morning light crept over the smoking battlefield. The sky shimmered in pale gold, broken ships casting long shadows on the scorched ground. The alien army stood motionless, uncertain whether to advance or kneel. And at the center, Marcus Hale remained on his feet, bloodied but unbowed. The Empress's voice broke the silence, smooth yet edged with disbelief. "Who are you, human?" she asked, her words echoing through the ruined valley. He lifted his head slowly, visor cracked, revealing tired human eyes that still burned with fire. "I am no one," Marcus said quietly. "Just someone who remembers what we lost." The alien generals exchanged glances, uneasy. The Empress frowned, sensing truth behind his broken tone. She turned to her war advisor, her voice sharp. "Find everything about him," she ordered. Moments later, the alien data feeds flickered alive. The Empress saw a hologram of Earth, green and blue, shining in the void. She heard reports of destroyed colonies, burned human fleets, and fallen outposts. And then a final line. "Captain Marcus Hale, last survivor of the Ares division." Her gaze returned to him. He should have been dead long ago, yet here he stood. "Why do you fight?" she asked again, her voice quieter now. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. "I fight because someone has to remember humanity didn't fade quietly," he said. "I fight because every name I lost still calls to me in the dark." The Empress felt an ache she couldn't explain, a shadow of something long buried. Her generals, restless, urged her to end it, but she could not. Instead, she gave a single command. "Let him live." Gasps spread through her ranks. "A single human defying the Empire and she spares him?" "Madness," they whispered, but the Empress only stared. Something about this man, this species, unsettled her more than any weapon ever had. Days passed under guarded silence. Marcus was kept alive, his wounds healed by alien medics who watched him in fear and curiosity. He said little, only staring out the window of his holding cell, watching alien suns rise and fall, but rumors spread fast through the ranks. Whispers of the lone human who fought the Empress's army began to reach the stars. Miners, soldiers, slaves, even nobles, everyone began to speak of him. Some called him the ghost of Earth, others the flame that wouldn't die. One night the Empress came to see him again. She entered without guards, her long cloak whispering against the metallic floor. Marcus did not bow, he simply looked at her, weary but steady. "You should hate me," she said softly. "I destroyed your world," he answered with no anger. No rage, only quiet calm. "You destroyed what we built, not what we are." She frowned, not understanding. He continued. "You can burn cities, you can kill armies, but you can't erase what makes us human." The Empress turned away, shaken by the simplicity of his words. She had ruled for centuries, conquering worlds without question, and yet one broken human made her question everything. His spirit echoed through her mind like an unending song she couldn't silence, a melody of defiance, hope, and grief. Even her dreams began to shift, haunted not by victories, but by human eyes staring back at her through the fire. Her advisors warned her, "This is dangerous, my Empress. The soldiers whisper that you've grown weak," but she silenced them with a single glance. In truth, she did not feel weak, she felt awake. For the first time in centuries, she wondered if power was truly strength, or if strength was what burned inside that dying man who refused to kneel. Marcus continued to heal, but his heart carried the weight of ghosts. He would sometimes whisper names, Elena, Darius May, the friends who died beside him. The Empress once asked, "Who are those names?" He looked at her and replied, "They are the ones who remind me I'm still human." And something inside her cracked, a memory of her own lost people before she was crowned, a memory she had buried under gold and conquest. When Marcus finally stood again, his steps slow but steady, he looked across the alien citadel and whispered, "Do you hear it?" The Empress frowned. "Hear what?" He smiled faintly. "The echo of humanity, it never fades." And in that moment, though surrounded by alien walls and endless stars, the Empress understood that the sound she heard wasn't mere words. It was the heartbeat of a species that refused to die, a rhythm that would soon shake her entire empire. That night she stood on her balcony, staring into the dark void of space. The stars seemed brighter than before. Her empire was vast, her power absolute. Yet somewhere deep within, she felt the first tremor of change, because one human, alone and forgotten, had reminded her that even silence could carry an echo that lasts forever. The Empress descends. The great hall of the alien citadel was filled with silence. The Empress sat upon her throne of silver and obsidian, her eyes fixed on the holographic image of Earth. It rotated slowly before her, blue oceans glimmering under the light of alien stars. She had conquered hundreds of worlds, erased dozens of species, yet this single planet, this extinct home of humanity, haunted her. Her advisors knelt below, their armored forms tense, their voices trembling. "My Empress," one said carefully. "The human refuses to submit. He spreads unrest among the soldiers." "Then silence him," another hissed. "He is a symbol. Destroy him before the army starts believing." But the Empress raised her hand and the hall fell quiet. "Believing in what?" she asked softly, her voice calm but dangerous. The advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Unsure how to answer, finally one whispered, "Believing in him." The Empress's gaze turned distant. She remembered the battlefield, the sight of Marcus standing alone against thousands, the way he refused to die, refused to surrender, refused to fade. Something about that moment had branded itself into her memory. It was not victory, she recalled, but humanity itself, raw, fragile, yet unbreakable. That night she left her throne behind. No royal guards, no banners, no crown. She walked through the dim corridors of her own palace, hearing the whispers of soldiers and servants fade as she passed. They bowed, but she ignored them. For the first time in centuries, the Empress walked not as a ruler but as a seeker. She descended into the detention wing where Marcus was held. The guards froze in shock as she approached, her cloak trailing across the cold floor. "Leave us," she ordered, her voice sharp as ice. The doors sealed behind her with a heavy sound. Marcus stood in the center of the room. Unchained but weary, his eyes met hers. No fear, no hate, only a strange calm that unsettled her more than any weapon. "You came alone," he said quietly. The Empress nodded. "I had questions." He smiled faintly. "So do I." For a long moment neither spoke. Only the hum of alien machinery filled the air. Finally she asked, "Why did you not run when you saw my armies approaching?" Marcus tilted his head. "Because running would mean I accepted that we were finished." She frowned. "You were, your kind fell. Your worlds burned." He took a slow breath. "Maybe, but humanity doesn't end just because someone says it does." She stared at him, searching his face for weakness but found none. His words were simple, yet each carried the weight of countless graves. The Empress turned away, her cloak sweeping behind her. "You are strange creatures," she said softly. "You break, yet you still stand," Marcus laughed weakly. The sound dry and tired. "That's the only thing we're good at," he replied. Standing after the fall. The Empress's chest tightened, an unfamiliar ache forming inside her. It was not pity. It was something deeper, older, a feeling she thought she had forgotten. She stepped closer, her glowing eyes studying the scar across his cheek. "What do you want, human?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "I don't want anything. I just want the galaxy to know that Earth mattered." Her breath caught in that single sentence. She saw the truth, not a warrior, not a conqueror, but a man fighting for memory itself. The galaxy had erased his people, but he refused to let them be forgotten. The Empress walked past him, her voice quiet. "My empire was built on obedience," she said. "No one ever dared to look me in the eye." Marcus turned to her. "Then maybe they should have." She stopped, her back to him, his words hitting harder than any weapon. "You speak as if you were not defeated," she whispered, he replied. "Because being alive is already victory." She turned then, and for the first time since her coronation the Empress smiled. Not with cruelty, but with wonder. "You are either mad," she said, "or something far more dangerous." He looked at her and answered, "I'm human." The room felt smaller then. The air heavy with tension, neither of them understood. Her power meant nothing in that moment, and his weakness seemed infinite yet unstoppable. As she left, her mind burned with thoughts she could not silence. In the corridors above, soldiers murmured rumors that the Empress had visited the human herself, that she had looked shaken afterward, her hands trembling slightly. She ignored the whispers, but deep within, she knew something had shifted. The human's defiance had become a mirror reflecting her own hollow empire, and the reflection terrified her that night. She stood before the stars once again. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the glass, and she whispered to herself, "What if strength is not power, but purpose?" The stars offered no answer, only silent light, and far below in the prison chamber, Marcus closed his eyes, whispering quietly, "For Earth, for hope, for whoever's still listening." And though the Empress could not hear him, somehow she felt the echo, a quiet pulse beneath the endless silence of her empire, a human heartbeat that refused to fade, the turning of the tide. The great arena of the Empress's capital world stretched beneath a sky of swirling clouds. Towers of black glass surrounded it, each one packed with alien citizens eager to witness the event. At the center stood Captain Marcus Hale, stripped of armor but standing tall. Across from him loomed a creature forged from metal and fury, the Empress's own war champion. The Empress watched from her elevated dais, her golden cloak flowing in the wind. Her general stood beside her, whispering nervously, "This is folly, my Empress." "The human is already dying," said one, but she ignored them. Her gaze locked on the lone man below. Something inside her needed to see this, needed to know if his spirit was truly unbreakable or merely legend. The arena fell silent as the champion roared. Its body shimmered with blue plasma veins, claws glowing with deadly light. It was a creature bred for victory, one that had never known defeat. But Marcus didn't flinch. His face calm, his heart steady. He raised his blade, cracked and scorched from his last battle. His lips moved silently, whispering the same words he always did before a fight. "For Earth," the Empress leaned forward, her fingers curling around the edge of her throne. The gong sounded and the champion charged. The ground shook as it moved, claws slashing the air, its roar shaking the walls of the arena. Marcus rolled aside, barely dodging a strike that split the stone floor in half. He fought with exhaustion as his companion, pain as his armor and memory as his weapon. Every move was slower than before, every breath heavier. But his eyes burned with something the champion couldn't understand, human will. The battle raged, sparks flying, steel and plasma colliding. The crowd roared for blood, for spectacle. But then something strange began to happen. The noise started to fade, replaced by silence as the aliens realized what they were seeing. Marcus, a broken human, was matching their greatest warrior blow for blow. He was bleeding, barely standing. Yet he refused to fall. The champion struck hard, its claws tearing through his armor. Marcus stumbled, falling to one knee, his vision blurring. The Empress rose halfway from her throne. Her heart tightening, her generals whispered, "End it, my Empress, show mercy." But she couldn't speak. Her eyes were locked on him, this fragile creature who stood in the face of death and smiled. Marcus rose again, one arm useless, the other gripping his sword. He looked at the creature towering over him and whispered through bloodied lips, "You don't understand, do you? We don't fight because we think we'll win." He lifted his blade slowly, his movements trembling yet determined. "We fight because someone has to." The champion lunged. Claws flashing, Marcus met the strike head-on, driving his burning blade deep into its core. The explosion of light blinded the arena for an instant. When the smoke cleared, both of them were on the ground. The champion's body was shattered, and Marcus lay motionless beside it. The arena held its breath. And then, slowly the human moved, he pushed himself up, broken and bleeding but alive. The Empress stared, disbelief and awe flooding her mind. Her people began to murmur, their voices spreading like wildfire through the city. The Empress's champion was dead, and a lone human had stood victorious. She descended from her throne, her golden boots touching the arena floor for the first time in decades. The crowd gasped. The Empress approached Marcus, her shadow falling across him. He looked up weakly, his eyes dim but proud. "You fought well," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "So did you," he whispered. Misunderstanding her rank, the Empress almost laughed. But her voice broke instead. She raised her hand and the soldiers bowed in silence. "No one touch him," she commanded. Her voice carried across the arena like thunder. The crowd fell to their knees, unsure if they were witnessing mercy or surrender. But the Empress herself felt something she had never known. Humility. When Marcus collapsed, she caught him before he hit the ground. His head rested against her arm, blood staining her golden sleeve. The crowd gasped. Their Empress, the ruler of worlds, holding a dying human like an equal. She looked down at him, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you just give up?" He smiled faintly. "Because giving up means forgetting. And we don't forget." Then his eyes closed. For a long time she sat there, the crowd silent. The Empress of the largest empire in the galaxy, kneeling beside a single human soldier, In that moment, the galaxy changed. The whispers began immediately, spreading from the arena to the stars. The Empress bowed before a human. The Empire has seen the heart of Earth. Later that night, the Empress stood alone in her chambers. She stared at her reflection, her golden robe still stained with his blood. She touched the stain gently, her expression unreadable. Her advisors begged her to declare the human's death a victory for the Empire, but she said nothing because deep down she knew the truth. The human had not just won a fight, he had turned the tide of an entire civilization. And as she looked out toward the stars, her voice whispered to the void, "If one human could do this alone, what happens when they return?" The question lingered in the silence, and the stars, ancient and cold, seemed to tremble at the thought. The truth of fear. The alien capital was silent that night. No music, no parades, no cheers for victory. Only a deep unease that settled over the Empire like fog. The Empress sat alone in her dark chamber. The lights dimmed, the stars beyond her window unmoving. In her hands she held a single piece of human armor. Cracked, burned and stained with blood, Marcus Hale's blood. The Empress's eyes lingered on it, her reflection glimmering across the metal. For centuries she had ruled through fear. Her people obeyed not because they loved her, but because they had never seen her falter. But now, for the first time in her long reign, she was uncertain. The human's words repeated in her mind again and again. "We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because someone has to." It was madness. And yet, it was truth. Her generals entered the room quietly, their armor clinking softly. "My Empress," one began carefully. "The crowds whisper dangerous things," another added. "Some call him the light of Earth. They say his courage was divine." She turned her gaze on them, cold and sharp. "Divine?" she repeated. "He was mortal." Yet her voice trembled slightly. And the generals noticed. They bowed lower, uneasy. "You must crush this myth before it spreads," they urged. "Before your rule begins to fracture." The Empress rose from her throne, her long cloak trailing behind her like liquid gold. "Tell me," she said softly, "what is it you fear most?" The generals exchanged glances, unsure how to answer. Finally one spoke. "We fear rebellion." She smiled faintly. "But it wasn't kind." "No," she said, her voice cold. "You fear belief." The word struck like a blade. They bowed lower, trembling. But as they left, she turned back to the window. Her reflection stared at her. A ruler who commanded stars, yet had been shaken by one dying man. Was this weakness or awakening? She could not decide. Elsewhere, deep within the medical wing, Marcus Hale breathed again, barely alive, sustained by alien machines that hissed and pulsed with strange blue light. When the Empress heard, she came alone to see him. He was pale, unconscious, his pulse faint but steady. She looked down at him. The same man who had refused to kneel, the same man who had bled for a world already gone. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling warmth through the cold air. "You shouldn't still be alive," she whispered. But a small part of her was grateful that he was. Days passed. Rumors grew like wildfire across her empire. Soldiers began to question the purpose of endless war. Workers in the foundries whispered that if one human could stand against the Empress's army, then perhaps the empire was not invincible. And on the outer colonies, slaves dared to raise their heads. It was as if the spark of one man's defiance had ignited a flame across the stars. The Empress sat with her advisors again. They shouted of danger, of treason, of control slipping away. But her mind was far from politics. She remembered Marcus's quiet voice, calm even in pain. "You can burn cities, but you can't erase what we are." His words lingered like a haunting melody she couldn't silence. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the observation deck above the Capitol. The air was cold, and the twin moons cast silver light across the horizon. She closed her eyes and listened, truly listened. For years she had heard only silence in her empire, but now she heard whispers carried by the wind. Whispers of humanity, of hope, of rebellion. Her most loyal guard approached, kneeling beside her. "My Empress, shall we prepare the fleets to crush the unrest?" he asked. She looked at him, her voice calm. "No," she said softly. "You cannot destroy belief with guns." He looked up, confused. "Then what will you do?" She turned her gaze toward the stars. "I will understand it." The next day, she ordered all information on human history to be brought to her chambers. Old recordings, intercepted transmissions, even fragments of art and poetry. She spent hours watching old Earth footage, oceans and laughter, storms and fire. She saw humanity at its best and worst. And with every image, she understood Marcus a little more. Humans were not powerful because of their weapons. They were powerful because they felt, because they believed even when everything was lost. Her generals grew restless, afraid of her silence. They began to meet secretly, whispering that the Empress had fallen under a human spell, that she was losing her edge, her mind, her command. But the Empress no longer cared. She had begun to see her empire for what it truly was, not glorious, but hollow, a monument built on obedience, not purpose. When Marcus finally opened his eyes again, the Empress was there, waiting. He looked at her weakly and smiled. "You're still watching me," he murmured. She replied softly, "I should have killed you." He chuckled, his voice faint. "Yeah, you should have." They both sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken truth. And then she asked the question that had haunted her for nights. "What makes you humans so unafraid of death?" Marcus looked at her with tired eyes and whispered, "Because death is just proof we lived for something." The Empress said nothing, but her chest ached for the first time. She envied the species she once despised. When she left his chamber, the dawn was breaking. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the alien capital, and for the first time in her immortal reign, the Empress felt afraid not of death, not of rebellion, but of what she might become if she kept ignoring the truth he had shown her. The human spark the palace no longer felt like her own. Every step the Empress took echoed through corridors filled with whispers. Soldiers looked away when she passed. Advisors exchanged glances behind her back. And in the silence between those whispers, she heard one word repeat again and again: human. The Empress had spent her life surrounded by power, but now that power felt brittle. The flame that burned inside one dying human had begun to spread. It crept through the hearts of her soldiers and citizens, a spark of belief that no amount of fear could extinguish in her private chamber. She stood before a holographic projection of Marcus Hale. His vital signs flickered faintly, still alive. Though barely, she had given orders that no one harm him. Her healers worked tirelessly, forbidden to speak of what they saw. They whispered, though, when she wasn't near, that the human healed faster than any known species, that his spirit refused to die, that he was not merely surviving, he was waiting. One night, as she stood by his bedside, Marcus opened his eyes for a moment. Confusion filled them, then recognition. "You again," he said weakly. A faint smile crossing his face, she replied, "You're difficult to destroy." He laughed softly, coughing. "We get that a lot." The Empress sat beside him, for the first time without her crown. "You confuse me, human," she said quietly. "You had nothing left, yet you still fought." Marcus looked up at the ceiling, his voice faint but steady. "You mistake nothing for emptiness," he whispered. "We always have something: memory, love, hope." "That's enough." The word struck her deeper than she expected. Hope, it was a word her empire had forgotten. Her rule had been built on control, on silence, on order. But this dying man spoke of hope as if it were stronger than her fleets. And she, the Empress of 1,000 worlds, found herself believing him. Days passed and Marcus began to heal. He could stand again, walk slowly through the corridors of the alien citadel. Soldiers stared when they saw him, unsure whether to salute or aim their weapons. The Empress allowed it. She wanted them to see that courage was not born from power but from will. Her generals, however, were furious. They gathered in secret, voices filled with venom. "The Empress has lost her mind," one growled. "She shields the enemy, honors a creature that should be ash," another hissed. In the shadows, a plan was born, a rebellion to take back the empire, not from an invader but from compassion itself. Meanwhile, the Empress began meeting Marcus daily. They spoke for hours, not of war but of life. He told her of Earth, its blue skies, its songs, its stories. He described laughter, pain, friendship, simple things her empire had crushed long ago. She listened in silence, captivated by the fragility and fire of his memories. Sometimes she closed her eyes, imagining oceans she had never seen, and for the first time, the galaxy's most feared ruler began to dream. But peace does not grow quietly. It rattles the walls of tyranny. Soon her council stormed into the throne room. "My Empress." One shouted, "Your mercy endangers us all." The outer colonies refused tribute. "Soldiers question your commands." She looked down from her throne, calm and unmoved. Then perhaps they should question, she said softly. Gasps rippled through the room. You speak like the human, another shouted. He has poisoned you. The Empress rose, her presence filling the hall like thunder. If truth is poison, then perhaps I have been starving for it, she said. Her voice cold and clear. The council fell silent, fear tightening their throats, but deep within her, the Empress felt no fear. She felt alive. The same spark that burned in Marcus now lived in her heart, and it terrified her enemies more than any weapon. Later, she returned to Marcus, who was standing on the palace balcony. The stars stretched endlessly before them. Your people hated us, he said quietly. But they didn't fear us until now. She turned to him. And why now? He smiled faintly. Because they see something they can't control. She looked at him for a long time, her expression softening. Do you think hope can conquer an empire? She asked. Marcus turned his gaze to the stars. Hope doesn't conquer, he said. It transforms. Below them, the capital began to shift. Citizens whispered new words: change, light, freedom. The rebellion her generals had sown now took shape, not against the Empress herself, but against what she once stood for. The people no longer feared her. They waited to see what she would become as dawn broke across the alien sky. The Empress finally understood. Fear could command obedience, but it could never inspire loyalty. Hope could. She turned to Marcus, her voice steady. The galaxy will come for us, she said. He nodded. Let them come. For the first time, she smiled, not as a conqueror, but as someone reborn. And far beyond the palace, across the empire, the spark that began in one human heart ignited a fire that would soon consume the stars. The day the galaxy changed, the storm began before dawn. Dark clouds rolled across the alien capital, thunder echoing like the drums of war. Lightning flashed above the spires, painting the sky in violent colors. And beneath that storm, the empire trembled. The Empress stood on her balcony, her golden cloak replaced by plain armor of black and silver. She no longer wore her crown. It sat forgotten on her throne, a relic of a past she no longer believed in. Below her, the city burned with rebellion. Her generals had finally made their move. Armies clashed in the streets, banners of old loyalty torn apart by those who now fought for freedom. Marcus Hale stood beside her. The scars across his face caught the lightning as he tightened the straps on his armor. He looked at her and smiled faintly. You don't have to fight, you know? The Empress shook her head, her voice calm but firm. You showed me what humanity means, she said. Now I'll show my people what it means to be free. He nodded. Then we fight together. The sky roared with engines as warships filled the air. The rebel fleets descended from orbit. Her loyalists scrambled to defend her. But in truth, no side knew who they were fighting for anymore, because in the heart of that chaos, everything the Empire had ever believed in was unraveling. The Empress and Marcus moved through the palace halls side by side. Blades and plasma fire cutting through the corridors, he fought with precision. Every strike deliberate, she fought with fury, her movements like lightning. For the first time, the galaxy's most feared ruler fought not to conquer but to protect. Each enemy that fell before her was a ghost of her own past, the version of herself that ruled through fear, through silence, through arrogance. When they reached the command tower, her most trusted general stood waiting, a towering alien with eyes like molten iron. He bowed mockingly. My Empress, he sneered. You've become what you once destroyed, weak. She stepped forward, her voice steady. Then let strength decide. The duel began in silence. Marcus watched as their blades clashed, sparks flying across the metal floor. The general was powerful, trained in 100 wars. But the Empress moved with purpose, not rage, each strike faster, sharper, more precise, until her blade cut through his defense. And he fell at her feet. She stood over him. Breathing hard, for a moment she saw in his eyes the fear she once inspired. But now she felt no pride, only sorrow. Your reign ends in mercy, she said quietly, lowering her weapon. Then she turned to Marcus. It's over, she whispered. He shook his head slowly, looking toward the burning city. No, he said. It's just beginning. They stepped onto the command platform overlooking the capital. The city was chaos, fires, shouts, ships falling from the sky, and yet among the destruction, something beautiful was happening. Citizens, alien and human alike, were helping each other. Soldiers were dropping their weapons. Children were pulling the wounded from rubble. The old empire was dying, but from its ashes, something new was rising. The Empress took the central broadcast crystal in her hands. Every ship, every outpost, every world under her banner could hear her. She looked at Marcus once, then at the stars beyond the storm. Her voice rang through the galaxy. For centuries, we ruled through fear, she began. We conquered, we silenced, we forgot what it meant to feel. She paused, her eyes softening. But one human reminded me that courage is not domination. It is endurance. It is belief. She looked into the camera, her tone shifting from royal command to quiet truth. From this day, the Empire will no longer stand as a monument to fear, but as a promise of freedom. Her words echoed through every channel. Across 1,000 worlds, soldiers laid down their weapons, and for the first time in living memory, the galaxy held its breath in peace. When the transmission ended, Marcus leaned against the console. Exhausted, he looked at her and smiled weakly. "You just ended an empire with words," he said. The Empress smiled back. "No," she replied. "You did." The storm outside broke at last. Rain fell for the first time in years on the capital's towers, washing away the smoke and ash. The city lights flickered back to life. Glowing soft and golden below, millions knelt, not in submission, but in reverence, not for a ruler, but for what they had all become together. As dawn spread across the horizon, the Empress removed her cloak and placed it over Marcus's shoulders. "You gave us something we didn't know we'd lost," she said softly. "A reason to hope." He looked toward the sky, where sunlight pierced through the clouds. "No," he whispered. "You found it yourself." And so, the legend spread. Of the day a lone human and an alien empress stood together and changed the stars. Of a war that ended not in conquest but in understanding. And in the centuries that followed, across the galaxy's farthest worlds, when people spoke of courage, they told the story of the man who fought alone and the empress who chose to listen. The day the galaxy changed forever. Because one spark, one human spark, was enough to light the universe.